governance and good quality decision making, particularly around procurement of large scale projects. So depending on the value of your project, if it's into the millions, I would always suggest that you do a 5-case model, even if it's not for external funding, even if it's an internally funded thing. But anything around about 250,000 upwards is, I think, it's good practice to write a decent model business case, so that you can actually see that you've included the right people, you've asked the right questions, and you've basically done good due diligence internally. And each of the cases build upon each other. So you can't really isolate any one of them. And I've seen people go straight into just doing the finances, or maybe just the strategic case. But actually, it makes more sense to build the case. And you don't have to write thousands of words if it's a small amount of money. But the process is quite a good discipline to go through. So there are 5 different cases, as they're referred to in the Treasury Green Book. So the strategic case is basically, what's the strategic fit with your organisation and the objectives that you're trying to achieve within that organisation. So basically, what priority is it that you're trying to address through this particular purchase or activity, project that you're going to put together. The economic case is about delivering best value, particularly in the public sector, and the Treasury will be very, very acutely aware of what best value means. And it's basically a rigorous options appraisal and cost benefit analysis. So what are your options? Have you got only very limited options, or have you got so many options that you really need to narrow it down to something quite tight? And then what are the costs of those options and the benefits, so that you balance that out? And effectively then at this point, you're starting to hone down to make a choice. You've been able to at this point say, we know what the strategic case is, we know the priorities for the business of the organisation. And now that we've gone through the options analysis and the cost benefits, we can actually make a selection or a choice: product, service, project, whatever it would be. And then you can move into the commercial case, where you're demonstrating how you're going to actually procure. So how are you going to take it to market? Who's going to be involved? What's going to be appropriate and for the level of the investment and for the size of the organisation? And what are the kind of deals that you might be able to get out there in the wider world? And what risks are associated with them? So some organisations are very, very risk averse. Others are pretty high risk enablers and takers. And so it depends on your organisation's culture and where you sit, how you might actually approach the commercial case there. The financial case is always an interesting one, because I've seen people put forward business cases that have said it won't cost us anything, although to purchase something that's going to be £1,000 or £10,000 or £20,000. You think, well, it's going to cost you something. And quite often what's missed in the finance case is the cost of implementation. So who's going to actually use the system that you're buying, or deliver the project that you're looking at? So you really are needing to look at the affordability at this point of the options that you've come to, and the preferred option. And also in the finance case, I would always suggest that you use finance people to help you to build that finance case, probably HR people as well. So you're kind of building out your stakeholder commitment at this point, and ensuring that they're really, really on board with what it is that you're proposing. And then the final part, which is sometimes quite weak in cases that I've seen, but this is really called the management case, and it's about governance. It's how are you actually going to evaluate the process? How are you going to monitor it? How are you going to make sure it's delivered properly? Who's making the decisions? Who's involved? What happens if it goes wrong? How do you escalate issues? What happens if the timelines run over? And so on and so forth. So all of those 5 components will build you a pretty robust business case for any project or activity that you're looking to do. So moving on, making the case for change is really what the strategic case is. Most organisations, if they're looking to build something of a 5-case model, they really are probably thinking about something that is like, say, a legacy system being updated, or a completely new thing being invested in. I was in the university in Glasgow yesterday, and the coffee shop had just invested in, I suppose, what you might call a McDonald's style self-service machine. So you could go up and put your order in. The ticket would be delivered to baristas, and then they would fill it and then shout out your order number and you would come and collect. However, no one seemed to really know how it was working. Nobody seemed to really know what was going on, and there was quite a lot of coffees sitting, waiting and uncollected, and a bit of chaos behind the scenes. So when they were probably making their business case for that change, they probably did quite a few things that were right, but they probably missed out some fairly critical component parts of it. So they probably made the case strategically, saying that, you know, it would improve business, etc., etc. But when they got to the implementation, they probably let that bit go a wee bit awry. So strategic context, what is the organisation's business strategy? What are the relevant policies that might be implemented in this particular business case? And what's the current and future requirements? That's one of the things that Steve and I frequently find are not actually very well defined. So what are you currently doing that you understand needs to be improved? And then what are your future needs? And future needs could be in a year's time or 5 years' time or even longer. And that's what makes the strategic case, making sure that you've got the objectives right, thinking about future spending needs, and thinking about where you're moving from and to. It's not often well thought through, that particular bit. And then looking at scope. And scope is something which is, again, needs to be quite clearly defined. If it's not well defined at this stage, you'll find when you actually start to move through the various different sections of the business cases themselves, it gets harder and harder to write. And you're constantly having to go back and reiterate. So you have to start thinking quite hard about that. What is that strategic case? Because that's really your fundamental. It's like building a house. This is your building blocks. This is your foundations. The strategic case fundamentally asks the question: why must we act now? And I was in an organisation not so very long ago where they basically were acting now because they were forced to act. The system that they had for finance was out of date, and it was no longer going to be supported at all by the provider within a period of 4 months. And so they were looking now to buy a new finance system, which was not inexpensive. I can say it was just about under £1 million of spend. But they should have been thinking about that probably a year ago to make sure that they could actually act on it and really get a robust case and go to market in a much more effective and efficient way. So they weren't thinking strategically at that point, and so they were in a bit of a rush. So moving on, the economic case is about delivering best value, and best value in the public sector is a very specific, as you know, very specific term and a very specific process. But the economic case is looking at what are the critical success factors. So what does good look like, if you like? How are you going to evaluate that? How are you going to make sure that those strategic objectives that we just talked about are aligned to this particular decision? What are your long list of options? So how many options are there for you to make a change? So in the case of the finance system, they brought forward one option. There were no long list options. It was simply, we're going to do this, and this is the system that we're buying. And we're buying this because other organisations of a similar size to us are also using this system. It's a pretty weak case to put forward. They could have looked at various different other things in the marketplace, but they had left themselves no time, basically. So they had no long list, and it was straight into a short list of options. And they didn't really list what I would consider to be the critical success factors. Their critical success was that they could still pay their staff, they could still pay their bills, they could still issue invoices. That's that's as basic as you can get in a finance system. So they were really put themselves in quite a difficult position and spending quite a lot of money to do it at the same time. You also want in the economic case to really list the benefits and the risks according to those benefits. And then here is where you're making your decision. You're actually coming out at the bottom of the economic case and say, having looked at the strategy, having looked at our strategic options, and now having looked at all of the various different things we think would deliver a good value for money, we're going for option E, which is whatever system or whatever particular product that would be. And you really need to kind of say why that particular one would work best for you. So those headings that you're seeing there, 1 to 5, even if in the lightest touch business case, even if you wrote a few sentences or paragraphs under each of those, you would have quite a robust commentary to talk through to those who are going to be funding, granting the funding for the project or the product you're looking at. So from here, we've now got a decision. We now know what the background is. We know why we're doing it. We know what we're now going to do. We're going for option B in this particular thing. So now we need to start thinking about, well, how do we make a viable deal out of this? How do we make this actually work for us? Because the focus here is about your procurement, your purchase process, making it competitive, making it realistic, making sure it does deliver the value that you're looking for it, and then building up a supplier relationship so that you can make sure that you can work with these particular providers. Quite often at this point, I would always recommend that if you've decided on product B, as we've just called it, there might be 4 or 5 different providers out there. It's worth talking to them before you go any further. It's worth talking to them about what it is that they can offer you. They would be able to give you rough estimates of costs. They might give you demonstrations. They might even give you a sandbox to play with if it's a particular system. So you can look to build up those relationships. It's not time bound, I suppose, and the time frame for this is, as much as little as you can make it. But it's worth making sure that you have those conversations. You have to have a procurement strategy to take it to market. So you need to know what your route to market would be. Are you going to be putting it out to tender? Are you just going to invite people in? How are you going to do that? What's your parameters in terms of funding amounts? What are your service requirements? Those requirements are probably the biggest piece of work to drill into, and it takes a lot of identification of who's going to use your system, what are they going to use it for, what level of interaction are they going to have, how are you going to put that into your tender documentation, is it easy for you to do that? Can you pull something off the shelf? Is it an out-of-the-box solution, or is it something that's going to be custom built? All of these things start to come out in the commercial case when you start to look into the detail of what your option that you've selected is going to be. And in all of that, you've always got to keep in the back of your mind, what's the risk associated with this? So looking at how do you manage the risks, and can you own all of them, or can you transfer some of those risks to the provider of the service or the product that you're buying? Quite often you are able to do that, and it depends entirely on what it is that your project or your product would actually be. And then basic thing in terms of a commercial case, what's your contractual arrangements? How are you actually going to treat this? Is it a revenue project? Is it a revenue and capital project? What are your accountancy treatments? And this is where you start to really extend your project team to help you write the business case. You'll need people from your procurement team if you've got it. You need people from accountancy if you've got them. You might need people from HR, and you might need people from technical backgrounds, depending on what the system is that you're looking at. So when you're writing a business case, although you might be the owner of it, you're not alone in doing that. You do need to pull on other, what we would call subject matter experts. And the commercial case is probably the bit where you really, really need to start building both your internal stakeholders and your supplier relationships to make sure that you've got what you need to make it all actually work. So then we go on to the finance case, and this is about proving that you can actually afford to do it. When I was talking to you earlier about the system that the organisation was within, and they were buying a new finance system, their affordability criteria were pretty weak. It was a weak presentation in total, but actually they couldn't afford it was something like £850,000, and they actually couldn't afford it. So I had asked them if they could spread the cost of that instead of as a one-off purchase. Could they spread the cost of it with their preferred supplier over a number of years? They hadn't thought of that. They went back to the supplier, and the supplier said yes. And the supplier said yes based on the fact that they want the business. And if they had done a good, strong commercial case, they'd have had that conversation before they brought the case forward to the board for approval. And they would have put that in as an option, because the board itself is quite risk averse, particularly around finances. So it's those kind of things that you start to think about when you're working through the different stages and the different cases. And there are many, many questions that will arise that you won't have the answers to and don't expect to have the answers to. What you have to think about is who in your internal team or your external team can help you to answer that question, and just keep asking them basically until you get to the point where you can capture good quality information. So the finance case is basically, it's, I think, probably less writing and more spreadsheets at this point. But you're looking at what is the requirements for capital investment and for ongoing revenue needs. And revenue needs might be quite long term. They might be 3 to 4 or 5 years. One of the business cases I wrote was a £10 million project, and the majority of that cost was revenue for the people who would use the system and be able to maintain and update the system. There were capital investment costs up front in the initial stages, but the majority of it, ongoing costs, were about how the system would be operated over that period of time. How's it going to be treated on the balance sheet? Now, if you're not an accountant, I wouldn't even try and answer that question. It's a question for the accountancy team, and it's a question for either your company secretary or whoever else is doing your accounts. So you really need to ask them what is the financial position, how do they going to account for it, and how do you represent that information in this particular section of the business case. If you think about these types of questions, if you've not asked and involve the right stakeholders, when you get to the point of asking for approval for your business case, they'll say no, because they'll feel, even if you've done a brilliant job, they'll still say no, because they won't have felt that they've had the chance to express their concerns, ask their questions, or indeed just put their stamp on it. So it's always good to involve as many people as you can. You then need to think about any pricing effects and the impact on prices, income and expenditure. And then you might want at this point to do what we would refer to as a sensitivity analysis. It's a bit difficult sometimes, but you're trying to estimate what would be the impact in a year or 2 years of price hikes from your vendor. Or can you, in your procurement, get a fixed price over a period of time so that is negated, and then you can show it here that you have negated that, you've thought about it. Again, it's a risk and sensitivity analysis that you want to make sure that you've thought through and represented well in your business case, so that you can actually get the approval you're looking for. And then finally in here, you want to make sure that you've got stakeholder support. I mentioned that a minute ago, but it really is important. If you're going with a business case that nobody actually expects to see, or that they expect to see, but they've not had sufficient involvement with and discussion, because if you think about this, you're going to be doing a number of iterations of each of these different sections. If you haven't involved them in that, the chances are when they get to the final ask, they're going to not likely to be supportive of it. My view is always to bring in as many of your stakeholders from as early as possible, and really get them on side and really genuinely draw on their knowledge and their skills, because they will have information available that you might not have thought about, and it's really important to get that included. And then you've got your final component, your management case. And this, again, I found often is the bit that is kind of, I don't know if it's because it's always the last bit, the last section, people might run out of steam or whatever it is. It is quite often not written very well, or it's not even thought through very well, but it's actually really critically important in the whole planning cycle. You can see there, again, you've got all these different headings, and these, I would suggest, are good headers for each paragraph that you want to write. What is the governance? Who's responsible for what? Who's doing what? How are you going to make decisions? And if a decision has been made and then something happens that you have to change, how do you go back and change that? Where's the authority lie? I had a situation once in a very large organisation in the public sector where no one wanted to take the decision. No one wanted to own the project. Everybody wanted the work done, but no one actually would say, hands up, it'll be me who'll make the final choice. And I kept pushing and pushing until we got eventually someone who said, oh, okay, I'll be that. But then I had to sit down with them and explain what that meant, because projects can go wrong. And if you're spending a lot of money buying a system, you want to make sure that you've got the right people with the right knowledge and the right ability, level of authority, to then move decisions forward and escalate them should they actually need to do that. Think about your project management, who's involved, who's going to be in charge, because again, if you've got unclear roles and responsibilities, if it's not been clearly defined, and you've got then a project team underneath your big governance structure, they won't be any better at moving things forward if you've got an unclear structure from the start of the process. So everybody needs to know who's doing what, and everybody needs to know who's kind of got the responsibility saying yay and nay, yes, let's move forward, let's not move forward, and so on and so forth, and thinking about the delivery of this whole activity. There's a big component around change management, and the biggest component of change management in something what you're writing a 5-case model for is probably communication. People need to know that change is coming. They need to be able to feel and see it. And I always stress under the change management heading, you probably need to get if you've got comms people involved. If not, you need to build that into the project team. It's good to maybe have some kind of logo or imagery or something that kind of be identified with the change that's coming. So in a case that I did recently, it was within an NHS setting, and we had a little electronic robot person as our logo, and we put that logo out on every single monthly newsletter that went out internally with a tiny little update. Didn't really have to be anything spectacular, but the idea was to implant in people's heads the idea that this change, this new system was coming. It was an electronic system, so hence the robot, to make it a wee bit more realistic. And then as we got closer and closer to doing the Aboriginal implementation, we then upped the ante in terms of the communication. So change management is really important, because when people see something different happening, they start to worry about their own jobs and how it's going to impact them and what's going to happen to them. So change is very important to incorporate something there and make sure, especially I think around the communication side of it. Benefits realisation, again, is a hugely underestimated piece of work. It can be quite difficult sometimes in an organisation to identify benefits beyond just straightforward finances. Earlier on, you might have asked for X number of hundreds of thousands or millions, depending on what the project scale is. And people will expect good benefits to come out of spending any kind of decent amount of money, and sometimes it's not as easy as it seems. So under your project management, I've always included a work stream which is just benefits realisation, and get people to really go to the users of the system or the activity that's coming their way and say, what's this going to, how's it going to be better for you? What's it going to look like? What is better going to be? And making sure that's caught in the requirements that you've defined earlier on, but then it's shown in your benefits realisation as well. Then risk management, we've mentioned that a few times, but you really need to be quite clear here about the mitigations that will come, the keeping of good quality risk registers, making sure that your planning is top-notch and that your communication about the progress is top-notch. And then, of course, the final bit, just evaluation and contingency, what happens post-implementation. And post-implementation, you really should be revisiting the benefits that you've said will be realised 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years down the line, and doing some kind of closeout report to say, yeah, that investment was worth it because, and you can go back to this business case that was written for you at that point. So the journey, strategic case, outline business case, full business case. Normally, if you're putting together a big investment, you would do a very high level strategic outline case, then a bit more detail around the outline case where people can have a bit more conversation and chat, and you're building up your stakeholders here, and then your full business case. Yeah, and quite often I've seen people just go straight into the full business case. That journey is the best practice. It's not always the one that actually happens, but it's worth looking at. And then just to say to you, that might sound like an awful lot of information, but we do have some support that we can give you for free. There is a couple of different templates that we can provide you with. Just need to ask. We'll be happy to do that. There's no pressure on you at all. If you don't want them, that's fine. But if you do, we're happy to provide them. We've also hopefully demonstrated today that we've got a reasonably good knowledge of how to write business case, what's involved in it, and we can help you to do that too. We've got the practical tools I've just mentioned there. We've got a wee handout that we'll give you after this, and we would be very happy for you to come and talk to us. We've got, as I said, we can do things like a review of what you've done. We can give you practical support. We can talk to you about what it is that we can help you with if that would be what you are looking to do. So we've just put that one at the end, and Steve, who's on this call, that's his email address there, steve@ivarty.consulting, if there's anything that you would want. So we've given you an option, a very short 1 hour consultation of up to about an hour, at very low cost, to talk to you about your own needs, should that be something that you would look to do. If your wider team wants something, we could also do that and have a wee chat with them, depending on where you are, if you're ready to proceed or not. We'd be delighted to give you further support if required.